Welcome to Daily Variety, your daily dose of news and analysis for entertainment industry insiders. It's Monday, June 1st, 2026. I'm your host, Cynthia Littleton. I am co-editor-in-chief of Variety alongside Ramin Satuda. I'm in LA, he's in New York, and Variety has reporters around the world covering the business of entertainment. I just landed in London a few hours ago. Variety is assembling a big team here this week for our Power of Women London event, which will be held on Wednesday, June 3rd. We are excited to expand this great franchise to a new city. In today's episode, in our box office segment, we'll hear from Variety's Rebecca Rubin on what was a truly monumental weekend at the box office. Dynasties rise and fall and upstarts emerge. Rubin explains the numbers that launched 1,000 think pieces this weekend. But before we get to that, here are a few headlines just in this morning that you need to know. The next edition of our Actors on Actors series will launch this week. Some great pairings this time. But my colleague Ramin Satuda knew there would be a dust-up on the internet as to why the stars of Heated Rivalry were not included. It turns out Connor Story and Hudson Williams had a good reason for declining the offer. Satuda explains it all in a story that has traveled the world since it went up on Variety.com on Sunday. DirecTV and Scripps TV stations are in a blackout battle. Scripps stations in 36 markets went dark on DirecTV's platform as of Sunday evening. The HBO drama series Euphoria is ending with season 3. That seemed pretty self-evident, but HBO confirmed it following Sunday's finale episode. R.I.P. to the spoiler alert character who didn't make it out of the episode. Don't miss the column that went up Sunday from my great colleague Owen Gleiberman, who had not a hot take but a reasoned take about why Hollywood needs to pay attention to what happened at the box office with Obsession and Backrooms. It's a good read with a lot of industry context. The UK's Home Office has barred Hassan Piker and Cenk Uygur and a handful of others from attending South by Southwest London. The Home Office stated that the decision was made because, quote, their presence in the UK may not be conducive to the public good, end quote. All of these stories and so much more can be found on Variety.com right now. And now it's time for conversations with Variety journalists about news and trends in show business. If it's Monday, we're talking box office with Rebecca Rubin, Variety's senior writer for film and media. She had a lot of work this weekend sorting out all the numbers and the data and what it all means for the key players. The results for Obsession and Backrooms were indisputably boffo, and this surprise development livened up the conversation on Saturday at the Produced By conference held on the Universal lot. Jason Blum and James Wan opened the affair, and they did a victory lap as the labels behind Obsession and Backrooms. Rebecca Rubin, well, it was quite the weekend at the box office. Thanks so much for joining me to unpack it all.
Thanks for having me, and this was definitely a fun weekend to be covering.
You used all your skills. It felt monumental with not one but two relatively low-budget horror movies coming into the multiplexes and just absolutely killing it. Killing it so much that it really showed up the second weekend of The Mandalorian and Grogu, which, as we talked about last week, was going to be the big test. Rebecca, let's start with the buzzy horror movies. What got in the water? What has made Obsession and now Backrooms just the talk of Gen Z?
There is so much to dissect from this weekend, so many interesting little tidbits, but what's interesting about both Backrooms and Obsession, which also had a great turnout in its third weekend, is both of these films came from YouTube creators, and they're people who were able to cultivate an online fan base for years, posting regularly to their channels. And there was a long-time fear, I think, in Hollywood that YouTube and the small screen was adversarial to movie theaters. And what's so significant here is that these two filmmakers have shown that when they have cultivated these fan bases, they actually can get them to go to theaters, and audiences are incredibly enthusiastic about it. And so this could be a whole new avenue for Hollywood if they're able to find the right creators and kind of have a new area of audiences who are excited about going to the movies.
This weekend, I covered the Produced By conference, and it was very interesting. First out of the gate were, like they'd planned it, Jason Blum and James Wan. And it's very exciting for Blumhouse Atomic Monster because both of these movies stem from one from each of those labels. And they were extremely excited. And Jason Blum especially pointed to what we haven't seen in directors before are digital native directors that honed their craft online on YouTube. And they both really emphasize the two-way street of connectivity between the fans and these directors. There's a constant feedback loop, which gives the directors just a really, really strong innate sense of what the audience wants, what they want to deliver. Do you think that's overstated, or do you think that this is a real factor driving people to the multiplexes?
I do, because I think that they have gotten to know their fan bases, and then those fan bases have come to trust them. And what's so cool here is that with Backrooms, it was A24's highest grossing opening weekend of all time by a landslide. Backrooms opened to $81 million, and before that, the record was set by Alex Garland's movie Civil War, which opened to $25 million. Backrooms made that in its first day in theaters. And then for Obsession, which Focus Features is releasing, it's now their highest grossing domestic release. And so when you think about the talent that both of those studios have worked with, it's just remarkable to see these first-time filmmakers both setting records. And I think it really is showing there's no bounds to what could of these partnerships if Hollywood is able to cultivate the right talent.
The assumption is that this is drawing a very young audience. What does the data that you're looking at show in terms of who turned out for Backrooms and Obsession?
Yes, this was a very young audience. What the opening weekend data has shown for Backrooms, nearly 85% of opening weekend crowds were under the age of 35, and then 50% were 25 years old or younger. And then Obsession opening weekend crowds were 75% of them were between the ages of 18 and 25 years old. All this translates to Gen Zs turned out in force to see not one, but two films. And so the fact that these two movies did not cannibalize each other is incredibly notable and just speaks to how excited people were and the urgency. There's a real sense of, we got to see it this weekend, opening weekend, while it's packed, while it's crowded. We're going to have fun watching it with other people. And that's really been the difference between the movies that have succeeded post-pandemic and the ones that have struggled, is the sense of feeling like there's a real reason to go to theaters. For a movie like Obsession has seen ticket sales jump from week to week. The audience is now starting to expand and it's hitting the mainstream. That is also a testament to people just saying, what is this movie? We want to be in on the fun.
I still can't get over these young directors building these platforms that now can be expanded. Is this the creator economy writ large on the big screen? It really seems like it is.
It does seem to be the case, because when you look at the post-track data for a film like Backrooms, you can see the reasons why people are buying a ticket. And an overwhelming majority said they were going to see Backrooms for the director, Kane Parsons, and then because it was an A24 movie. And I think just the collaboration between these two really distinct brands is kind of what helped turbocharge ticket sales over the weekend. And something else that was also notable from the audience data was that 50% of people said that they went with a group of friends. So what the takeaway for that is just people want to make it into an event and want it to feel like this big communal experience. And that is really what has separated this film, I think, from some of the other movies that were big, but maybe didn't break out on this scale.
Has anybody created like an Obsess Rooms or back session, or anybody created a moniker? Because I do wonder if the presence of two movies like drew people out. You know, did they want to do both the same night kind of thing?
Well, I actually do think I just anecdotally know some friends who ended up seeing both on the same day. And another thing that I think works with both of these horror movies is that they have very different subject matters. Backrooms is kind of a more foreboding, psychological mind bender. It's about parallel universes. And then Obsession is bit more of a frenetic thriller. It's about the dangers of romantic fixation. It didn't feel like too much of the same, even though they are both under the horror umbrella. I think it actually made it work well for a double feature. And I think that's why we saw such a big turnout for both of these films. You were able to see both without feeling like you were just having nonstop horror for however many hours they were.
It'll be interesting for you to see the midweek business, how that goes right now.
Actually, for Obsession, the midweek numbers leading up to Backrooms were enormous, and it was having a great turnout. Monday through Thursday, it was actually selling more tickets than Star Wars, Michael, Devil Wears Prada 2, just these movies that have much bigger IP behind them. And I think that was sort of the indication that these films were going to topple Star Wars at the box office. But that midweek data was really illuminating that it wasn't just a typical horror movie where people go opening weekend and then it falls off a cliff. We've actually really seen sustained interest day to day. And so there is really no telling where ticket sales are going to top out for either of these films.
The good news for these two movies was not so good news for The Mandalorian and Grogu. Do you think that the second weekend of this film just got trampled by the force of these buzzy horror movies? Or do you think we probably would have seen a really sharp drop-off, even if it hadn't been so competitive at the movies, for that younger demo that is still so crucial to Star Wars?
It's interesting because I think the fact that both Backrooms and Obsession were so big this weekend shows that more than one movie, more than two movie releases can succeed at one time. So I think it speaks a little bit more to the interest in the Star Wars property. And The Mandalorian and Grogu was actually playing on about 500 more screens than Backrooms and about 1,000 more screens than Obsession. And it still came in third place behind both of those films on weekend charts. And it dropped 70% from its opening weekend. It's the largest second weekend drop in the history of Star Wars. It's showing that it's really not appealing beyond the core fan base. And this is a franchise that's about 50 years old. And so it is an aging franchise. And I don't know if they were able to resonate with younger audiences. That being said, I think that Disney and Lucasfilm knew that there were some limitations going into this movie because it is the continuation of a Disney Plus series that had been running for 3 seasons. And so there's a big buy-in here. If you're not a fan of The Mandalorian, you might feel like, I'll just skip this one. For movie theaters, they are actually quite thrilled that this film is playing in theaters at all. And so for them, this is still a movie that's made $136 million. So while that's not that significant in the Star Wars universe, I've talked to a few theater owners and they have said that is, quote, found money. They view it as money that they would not have gotten if this was on Disney Plus. And it wasn't that expensive of a film compared to other Star Wars movies. The best comparison that people are using here is Solo, which opened in 2018 and it cost almost $300 million. This movie, by comparison, was $165 million. And so it's not going to be an embarrassing financial disaster or anything like that. It's just kind of showing that Disney really needs to work to broaden the fan base when they bring Star Wars back to the big screen again.
Given that Mandalorian did start as a streaming show, there may just be a little fog for some general consumers about, well, wait, won't this be on Disney Plus soon? So that, as you pointed out a couple weeks ago, that was going to be a challenge for them. What should we look out for next weekend?
So next weekend will be an interesting weekend because Scary Movie is opening. It's the first Scary Movie to be back in theaters since 2013. It's been quite a long while, and horror has been so popular, of course, in the last decade. There's so much to parody and skewer and make fun of, and it'll be really fun, I think, if 3 horror movies are at the top of the box office. And then Amazon is opening Masters of the Universe, which is Mattel's second movie. Of course, they had Barbie, which was an enormous hit. And so it's going to be interesting to see how well this audience for He-Man, the toy that it's based on, how much that translates. And anecdotally, from what I've heard, people say the movie is very fun. And so it's going to be interesting if this is a property that is of interest to Gen Z audiences, because I'm sure many of them have never heard of the He-Man action figure toy. It is a little bit more of a Gen X property, and So it's just going to be, I guess, a testament to whether they're able to get the word of mouth needed to excite people.
Talk about another company with a very high bar to meet from Barbie in 2023. That gives us something to look out for. Rebecca, as always, thank you so much for your time and your expertise.
Thank you for having me.
As we close out today's episode, here's a few things we're watching for. The Newport Beach TV Festival begins today and runs through June 7th. Netflix's Running Point and CBS's Survivor are among the shows being highlighted. Variety will honor Andy Cohen at the event with our Creative Impact in TV Award. He'll be presented that honor by my colleague Kate Arthur on June 5th. Tomorrow night on June 2nd comes the return of game show Password for a summer run on NBC. The great Keke Palmer and Jimmy Fallon host. Summertime means music festivals. The Bonnaroo Music Festival in Tennessee begins on June 11th with headliners The Strokes, Youngblood, and Turnstile. The 4-day music festival will stream live on Hulu and Disney+. We love to hear from our listeners, so please send thoughts, gripes, and other feedback about Daily Variety to podcasts@variety.com. Before we go, congrats to John Petrie. The BBC veteran has joined the busy production banner Hat Trick as creative director. He came to the BBC in 2021 and was responsible for establishing the BBC Comedy Festival, which just wrapped its 5th edition. Thanks for listening. This episode was written and reported by me, Cynthia Littleton, with contributions from Rebecca Rubin. Sticks, nicks, hick, picks. Please leave us a review at the podcast platform of your choice, and please tune in tomorrow for another episode of Daily Variety.